Las Vegas is no stranger to the national spotlight, but the attention it's getting right now is for an event that happened 30 years ago. On September 7, 1996, rapper Tupac Shakur was killed in a drive-by shooting near the Las Vegas Strip. And now, 63-year-old Duane "Keefe" D. Davis is on trial for allegedly orchestrating the murder. Davis has pleaded not guilty. His trial began with jury selection on August 10th, and on Wednesday, the prosecution rested its case. And in that Las Vegas courtroom for it all has been Jessica Hill, reporter for the Associated Press. Jessica, welcome back to Nevada Week.
Thanks for having me.
How strong is the evidence in this case?
That is a great question. It depends on what you'd consider evidence. Prosecution has really showed jurors Davis's own words. However, defense has said there's no real physical evidence that ties client to Las Vegas that night and to the shooting. We saw one account that there were bills, like hotel bills from Las Vegas, that were found in Davis's home. However, we don't know where those bills are, and we don't know the date of those bills. But mostly, prosecution just relied on Davis's own words. You know, he wrote a book, or co-authored a book, in which he described himself being there that night. He testified to law enforcement in 2008 during a proffer agreement, describing his own role. And then he also promoted his book and participated in multiple interviews with media, outlining his role. And it just depends on what you consider evidence. Prosecution says this should be enough to convict him. And his defense has been like, well, my client is not trustworthy and he's unreliable, and these words were just made to make money.
What did he say to police back in 2008 about his role?
So he described how he was in the car that night in the white Cadillac that pulled up next to Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight. He was in the passenger seat, and because he was in the passenger seat, he couldn't get a good shot. He said that he would have if they were on the other side, but he said that he gave the gun back to the back seat and shots were fired from back there. He made other claims that Tupac, it looked like, had reached for a gun. However, that has not been proven that there's a gun in that car. Some of his testimony has varied during depending on what interview it was. In some cases, he has said his nephew Orlando Anderson was the one that pulled the trigger. In other times, he says that he doesn't know who pulled the trigger. But regardless, he was the only one that's allegedly still alive who was in that car.
Orlando Anderson is his nephew. He has passed away since. He's believed to be the man that actually pulled the trigger. How big of a deal was it that the judge allowed that recording with police to be admitted as evidence?
It was a big deal. I think it's one of their main pieces of evidence at this point, because this was an agreement that Davis had to tell the truth to law enforcement. It's also a big deal because he was told that this would never be used against him. In the hearing, you could hear them talk about how this proffer agreement was private, this would not be used, we're not here to arrest you. And in the courtroom, as this was being played, you could hear people make a sound or shake their head, not necessarily, in favor of Davis, but just acknowledging that, prosecution has said, or not prosecution, but law enforcement has said this wouldn't be used against you. And it has been. So I think that helps, prosecution, and defense has to say, well, maybe he wasn't telling the truth in this interview either.
What has the courtroom been like? Who's been there every day? Has it been packed?
Most days it's been mostly packed, yes. Tupac Shakur's family has been sitting in the front row every single day of the trial. We've seen fans come in and listening intently, and then just some curious bystanders that decide to come in and just watch the trials proceeding for that day.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, I talked to a couple who were on vacation in Vegas, and they're like, we would just want to check out a trial. So they just sat in on it. Yeah.
What about the defendant, Duane Davis? What has he been like in court?
He's mostly been pretty quiet. We are watching his facial expressions. Sometimes he seems frustrated. There was one moment a few days ago in court where, after the jury had left, he stood up and told the judge that he was really upset that witnesses have been giving out his addresses, because it's being live streamed everywhere and people are watching. And in some cases, witnesses have talked about how they conducted searches on Duane Davis's residences, and he has said that they're giving out his address in public, and people have come to his house and have harassed his family. And so actually, in response, prosecution has made it sure that his address hasn't been given out since.
Okay, and then what about Tupac's family? Who is there from his family, and what are they telling you?
Yeah, his brother and sister have been there, and then some like family friends, some cousins have been there throughout the trial. Mostly they're just like sitting pretty quietly and watching, intently what is happening. They have talked to me about how they feel like the justice is coming far too late. It has been 30 years. They're wondering why it's taken so long, and there are a lot of other questions that haven't been answered yet that they'd like to see, brought up.
Okay, so the prosecution has rested its case. It's the defense's turn now. Will they have their defendant, Dwayne Davis, testify?
At this point, we do not know. He was taking it under consideration last night.
Wednesday night.
Wednesday night, yes. So it's not clear yet. I will guess that the answer is no, but we shall see. It would be interesting if he does take the stand.
Why would you guess that?
I think defense attorney Samft doesn't want his client to testify, especially because his entire words have been used against him so far. And the judge has made it clear that if he does take the stand, he will be cross-examined. And so we'll see what happens with that if that does come to fruition.
And then what about the timeline of this trial? I have read it was estimated it would take about a month, but it seems it could be wrapping up quicker. Is that true? And does that indicate anything about the case?
Yes, it definitely is wrapping up much more quickly. We're expecting closing statements to happen on Monday. And then, jury will obviously take it under consideration, and maybe we'll have a verdict within the next, several days.
This is a big task for that jury.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think it's an easy case to really consider, The defense attorney, he says that he was not surprised by how quickly it's been going. He claims, it's because there is not a lot of evidence, and there's only so many times that you could replay Dwayne Davis's words. So.
All right, Jessica Hill of the Associated Press, thank you so much for joining Nevada Week.
Thanks for having me.